How do we live balanced, prosperous, purposeful lives where we get to feel as though we have a meaningful impact on the world? Not where we're either just taking care of number one and screwing the world, or where we're martyring ourselves to some cause and forgetting about ourselves, but what is a way of life in which we actually get to live joyfully and happily in service of each other, which I actually believe is the way we were born and are meant to live. And so No Impact Man opened up a career pathway for me where I actually get to bring that question before people and have conversations and stimulate people into thinking about that for themselves. And most importantly, to believe that it's actually possible, that I can have an authentic, impactful life where I meaningfully engage with the concerns and the problems that I see in the world, that I can and do make a difference. To be able to be part of that conversation, to me, is just amazing.
This is episode 4 of the Ownstream Podcast, featuring Colin Beavan. Welcome to the Ownstream Podcast. This is Stephen Shelley, and I am delighted that you are with us this week. Episode 4 features our recent conversation with Colin Beavan, probably best known as, quote, No Impact Man, although as we will discuss quite a bit in this conversation, his work now is focused in a very different way than sustainability and the environment and impact, although he remains interested in that. What he's really doing now is much more intimate and personal, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Anyway, we're delighted that Colin is on this 4th episode of the Ownstream Podcast. We are off and running, and we're delighted that he joined us. It's a great conversation. You're going to get a lot out of it. Just a little note here before we get rolling. Teresa will not be on this podcast. This is just me and Colin talking. We got started with Teresa, and then baby started crying in the other room, and because I had put together the interview series with Colin, meaning I had kind of crafted the questions, etc., it made more sense for me to stay on the call, so Teresa jumped off and looked after the baby while Colin and I chatted. So anyway, that's why I am solo writing this episode. But Colin is actually a good friend of ours from back in Brooklyn, and we know him through a lot of mutual friends, and he's very involved in the community there, and we see him and we know his beautiful daughter, Bella, and wonderful, wonderful people. And I'm very grateful to him for joining us. And Colin, as I said, is best known for the film No Impact Man, which this has become the era of documentaries chronicling interesting, kind of out-of-the-box lifestyle experiments. And I think No Impact Man was one of the first. Morgan Spurlock, Super Size Me, also comes to mind as being an early film along those lines. So I think Colin was right at the beginning of this movement to self-create media, or not self-create necessarily, but to be a subject in an intimate way of a radical lifestyle experiment. And No Impact Man is basically he and his family's journey at the time towards reducing and eliminating as much as possible their impact on the environment. And they did so in New York City, which is no easy thing. And it's a fascinating film. We should definitely watch that. Everything from composting in the house, turning off the electricity, riding a bike everywhere. A lot of cool stuff. It's a very interesting film and inspiring, to say the least. Nowadays, though, Colin at the time was featured on the Colbert Report. He was, I think, on Good Morning America, became a bit of a celebrity. And I think people, when they hear his name, they think No Impact Man, No Impact Man. They think the environment, they think sustainability, all things that he remains interested in. But really what he's about now is how to live a meaningful life and how to do so on one's own terms in a way that's really resonant and authentic to oneself. And his new book, I guess the book was released probably around a year ago. I think the paperback came out more recently. It's called How to Be Alive. And we do a lot of talking about that, which is very synchronous with the Ownstream mission. In fact, at one point, Colin begins to talk about this mainstream path and about how very often fulfillment lies outside of that. And I was just shaking my head yes the whole time, because it was it was so in alignment with what we're doing. So it was just a perfect conversation to have on this podcast. I think you're going to really, really love it. What else can I say about Colin? So he's going to talk a lot about that path and where fulfillment lies is outside of that. But it begins with a deep inquiry into oneself about what is my calling? What am I really here for? What do I feel is a purpose that I can embody? And he has an exercise that's on his website. We'll link to that in the show notes. That's really helpful and very thorough, very complete. Kind of like Colin, thorough, complete, thoughtful. And I think every time I've encountered him, I'm always sort of called to really think about things in a much more subtle way. He's a very insightful man, to say the least. We also talk a lot about some very interesting kind of specifics about his own life, his diet, how he works, and kind of how he approaches his own work during the day, and his really, really vibrant meditation practice is covered too, which I think you'll appreciate. Anyway, there's just a lot in here, really sort of about his life since No Impact Man. We talk about that a lot, but what he's doing now and what his life is about now is really about meaning and how to help people live more meaningful lives. So with all that in mind, I'll turn it over to our conversation with Colin Beavan. I will be back afterwards to wrap up. Until then, enjoy. By way of starting, I'd like to kind of hear, and I know Teresa would too, about kind of what your life was like as a professional before that project happened, and maybe you could talk about, what your life was like before, and then what sort of inspiration or what happened that caused you to go in a different direction.
Sure. I mean, I'll just say this about No Impact Man. No Impact Man was a project that I did in 2007 where I lived as environmentally as possible in the heart of New York City. And it was documented in my book, No Impact Man, and also a documentary film, No Impact Man. And so before I did that project, I've been a writer for many years, and I had written 2 history books. Uh-huh. And I really enjoyed writing. I love to write. It's my passion. But in my 20s, I had been a public relations consultant. But I only worked for socially good organizations. So in my 20s, I had this kind of work that I did where I got to address the concerns that I had in the world. And then in the 30s, I wrote these 2 history books and a bunch of magazine articles. And so in my 30s, it was kind of about my passions, my talents, what I liked to do. But I left behind my concerns and my feeling like I was helping the world. So in 2006, the combination of news I was hearing about climate change with the fact that we were in wars over oil in Iraq and Afghanistan just made me upset and depressed, and I didn't feel like I could just follow my passions anymore. I felt like I really needed to address myself to the things in the world that bothered me. And so when No Impact Man, so it was great. I mean, I was a writer in New York, and it was great, but there was a certain emptiness that I had. I was, in some ways lacking in meaning and purpose. So as an artist, like I had the self-expression part, but not a part where I felt like I changed minds and changed hearts and souls. Right. So No Impact Man was a project where I kind of got to bring the concerns that I had with the world from my 20s together with my passions. And it actually completely changed my career, because ever since then, that's what I get to do. I get to use the talents that I most love using in service of the things that I most care about in the world.
And were you, before that happened, were you kind of conscious about what you ate and about, your lifestyle, consumption, things like that? Or was it, there's a kind of mind of a person that lives, I think, in this world that's somewhat aware of those things, but not as aware of it, I think, as you are now. Was there a big educational process that took place there?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the research shows that people who are most concerned with the environment, as I obviously was during the No Impact Man experiment, people who are most concerned with the environment tend to have grown up in the countryside. And the reason for that is because people that grow up in rural environments, they see where they see where their food comes from. They're also subject, they're more subject to things like changes in the weather, changes in the season. People who grow up in rural environments have a more ready understanding of their interconnectedness with the rest of the world. Whereas, some city kids, if you show them a piece of fruit or a berry, they actually don't even know where it came from. They don't know that it grew on something. And so really don't understand the interconnectedness. So now I grew up in the countryside, and I had grandparents, Depression era grandparents who, saved every grocery bag and folded up the round paper bags and reused the newspapers for this and that. And my grandfather also was the chairman. I come from a little seaside town called Westport, Massachusetts. My grandfather was the chairman of the Conservation Trust in town, the Land Conservation Trust. So there is a certain, because of my grandparents and because of growing up in the countryside, I had this kind of awareness of how the planet works as an ecosystem just in my bones. Also I've always been kind of an alternative life hacker sort of person, somebody who was looking for different ways to live. But in fact, one of the big impacts that No Impact Man had on my life is that it actually broke me out of attachment to doing things the way that everybody else did them. No Impact Man was the time in my life where I finally kind of came to the place where I'm living differently than other people, and from then on I've kind of been insistent about being the person who I am, if you like. And then the last part, I suppose, is that before No Impact Man, I've had a long-term Zen meditation practice, and I think that too also makes you feel more connected to the world, more responsible for the world. But all of those things hadn't come together and coalesced in a project or in the way that I run my life until No Impact Man came along.
And so, when this transition or change began to happen, was there a moment that stands out, or maybe some piece of information that you were made aware of, or perhaps a movie or a talk given by someone? Was there anything in there that was a definite turning point that you can, looking back now, point to and say something happened there?
Well, there's a few things. I could go a little woo-woo on you for one thing.
Let's do it. We're into it.
We're into woo-woo.
Yeah, okay. So in the tradition
you're
of
the second person who said woo-woo that we've interviewed. That means we're doing something right.
Out of 3.
2 out of
3. That's good.
You can put that in your advertising. 2 out of 3 interviewed by Stephen and Teresa are woo-woo.
Certified woo-woo.
So in my tradition of meditation, there's a tradition by which people go on retreat for 100 days. But for lay people like myself who have children or have jobs and responsibilities in the world, who can't go off to kind of find themselves and discover themselves for 100 days or 3 months, there are a few different types of practices that we can do. And one of them is 100 nights of midnight practice. It's where you in my case, what I did was, and I went to bed at about 10, slept for a couple of hours, then got up and meditated from midnight till 2 in the morning. The reason for that is because it's said that there's some sort of, hi baby, it's said that there's some sort of special energy to practicing at that time of night, almost magical energy. And the reason to do this long commitment to practice is because you're searching for some clarity or direction in your life. And I did, I was in this place, as I said, where I had written these 2 history books, which I'm very proud of, but didn't feel like they were central to my life direction anymore, but didn't know what would come next. And I did this 100 nights of midnight practice. And the idea for No Impact Man came shortly after that. Now, that's the woo-woo part. Can I say there's a causal relationship? For sure. Is it causality or correlation? I don't know. But I think that there was something to that. Like that when we really take a chance to deeply, because that's what meditation is about. It's actually where you sit quietly and watch yourself in order to gain wisdom. I get to, what am I? It gives us wisdom. We turn off our thinking for a while and don't concentrate on our stories about our lives, but actually look at it. What's happening right now? So I think that was a connection to that in this pivot that happened in my life. And then the other thing that happened was just that, things were happening like that January before I did the No Impact Man project. There was a time in which, days in which in January in New York, when it should be 20 degrees, I was seeing college students from the NYU dorm down the street from my then apartment, walking down the street in shorts and T-shirts in January. And then again, of course, the coffins coming home from Iraq, to say nothing about, the Iraqi citizens that were getting killed, over 100,000 Iraqi citizens. And so just this, and it just in me, it just became this kind of a giant conundrum that what was happening was, on the one hand, we had what we were doing to get our oil, which was the war in the Middle East, and since then, we had the BP oil spill, and we've got what's happening in the Alberta tar sands, and all sorts of, so we've got what we do to get the oil. We have what happens when we burn the oil, which is climate change. And then in between those two things, we have the way of life, which is the reason why we burn the oil. And we burn this oil supposedly to have this great, happy life. But living in New York, what I saw was so many of my friends working their rear ends off 10 or 12 hours a day, not getting to spend time with their families or to have fun with the people that they cared about or loved, or having gone to college and gotten a master's because they found something really fascinating and interesting and found themselves in work that had nothing to do with what they were interested in, feeling like they were whoring themselves out for some corporation, and deeply unhappy. So, and that, of course, is in the rich part of the world. In the poor part of the world, over 1 billion people don't have access to clean drinking water. So we had this situation where what we were doing to get oil and what happened when we burned the oil was destroying the place where we lived. And meanwhile, the way we were living didn't even make us happy. And that just was weighing on my mind. And that's kind of what took me towards the idea of No Impact Man.
It's an interesting winter you're pointing to. I remember specifically walking in Brooklyn in shorts, and it was mid-January, and being baffled as to how this could possibly happen. It was 73 degrees or something. That all makes total sense. And when you, if I remember correctly, did you start blogging? You just start kind of writing about this online? Was that kind of the genesis, at least in terms of a physical presence?
Let me tell you this story of how I came to do the project in the first place, and then I'll tell you about the blogging and the writing and what happened was, so I had this big ball of concern, and it was really depressing me that I just talked about. And I thought I'll write an article. I'll write a book about this. And everything idea I came up with, my agent would say, yeah, that's true, but it's such a downer. He would say, who's going to pay $28 to read a book about, that's as depressing as the book you want to write, right? So he really challenged me to come up with a way to write about this that would really engage people instead of one just preaching to the choir or just depressing people. And literally the day he and I had this conversation, it was a summer day, It was very, very hot. And I came home, and it was blistering hot in the hallway of my building, and I opened the front door to my apartment, and this frigid cold air came rushing out over me because I had left the air conditioners on in the apartment. There was no one home. I realized in that moment that, geez, I had left the air conditioners on because I was unwilling to wait the 20 minutes it takes for the apartment to cool down. And I thought to myself, what if we're literally in a war for oil where people are dying for oil, right? So people are dying for energy. And what does it say about me that I'm actually wasting that energy? I mean, I could draw a direct connection between the waste of that air conditioning and people dying in war. And I thought then maybe I shouldn't write a book about how all you people should change, that downer of a book my agent was talking about. Maybe I should write a book about how I should change. And that's how No Impact Man came along. And so, the way that's where the idea generated, and then the way that it works when you're a nonfiction writer, you write a proposal and you sell the book. And then I launched the project actually after the proposal was already sold. And then at that time, blogging was a new thing. And I thought, oh, maybe I should blog about this too. And so I started blogging about it. And the blog got a gigantic amount of press attention. And then some filmmakers came along and they started recording us too. And so the film happened also.
Right. And so you're going down a fairly unconventional path at this point, from what sounds to be like a more mainstream path, let's say writing textbooks. What kind of resistance did you meet from your friends, your peers, your family, and how did you deal with that? And I think for anybody who is going to kind of steer away from the well-worn paths in life into uncharted territory, this is something is very common across the spectrum, dealing with the naysayers, the resistance, negativity. What did you experience during that, and how did you continue going and thriving at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, we had this very strange. So first of all, just to say the level of reaction in the movie No Impact Man, there's actually a scene where I hold up the answering machine and we listen to the phone messages. Yeah. And the phone messages, there's like all these TV stations are calling to ask for interviews. So there was this crazy amount of press attention for a while, and there were all sorts of very strong reactions to what we were doing. There was, first of all, there were people that thought that, I was the devil. Stephen Colbert, when I went on Stephen Colbert, he called me you remember Charles Manson, the serial murderer?
Yeah.
But he called me the Charles Manson of the environment or something like that. So there were people that really just hated that I was, the way that I wrote and spoke was never about, you should do this or you should do that. It was a really introspective project talking about what I was doing and why I was doing that. But I think it held a mirror up to people, and people feeling like, yeah, I'm pursuing a life that I don't even believe in myself, and I'm working my rear end off for it, and now you're coming along and telling me that, or reminding me that even I think it's wrong.
Right.
And I think that's why there was so much, there was a negative reaction. And there was the other kind of reaction, which was like, that I was some sort of, I was actually when the French edition of No Impact Man came out, I was in Paris doing interviews with journalists. This, I can't remember exactly the question the journalist asked me, but it was something along the lines of, what should I do with my life, he said. And I was like, well, why are you asking me? And he said, because you are a guru, no? So there was this kind of opposite reaction, which was like, I was either a devil or an angel, and both of those extremes are difficult for a person to deal with.
Definitely.
So and then the last reaction, which was the surprising reaction to me, was that there were elements within the environmental movement that disliked what I was doing. And the reason for that is because they felt that I was taking attention away from the need for collective or regulatory action on climate and environment, and making people think that if we just changed our light bulbs and didn't use plastic bags, that everything would be okay, which of course I wasn't doing. And since then, the environmental movement has changed to kind of embrace my approach a little bit, because this idea of us living our lives differently is actually a way where people can themselves engage in something that they care about. It's not just about some faraway politician doing things, but about us doing stuff too, but about us living our values.
Well, it's definitely, I think your No Impact Man and Super Size Me, if I remember correctly, these were two of the first films where people kind of took challenges upon themselves to become examples or to demonstrate in real time kind of the realities of how certain things worked. Yours being within the environment, and his, of course, being about food and diet and fast food, but both, I think, set in motion a kind of documentary that we now see out there where people are doing things themselves and chronicling themselves doing it as an example for kind of, as a way of getting the word out, becoming kind of a guinea pig, if you will. And I wonder, like now, when all this happened, your career, you became a speaker, then you were an author, you were part of this film. It must have radically changed your life, and business life in particular.
I mean, if you're asking me if I made a gigantic amount more money, it's surprising how many people think that being famous is the same thing as being rich. Because the two are not, especially when you're, it'd be one thing to be famous amongst a bunch of millionaires, but being famous against a bunch of people who want to live thriftily and like minimalists.
Composting in their houses, that's a whole
That's right.
thing.
That's a whole different thing. But what it
opportunity
did
and impact. I mean, I think I know that you've done a lot of speaking and things like that. That opened up quite a lot.
Yes, that's what it did do, is that it opened up a pathway for me where I actually got to have a career that was fully in line with my values. I mean, up until today, that where I got to go, where I get to write about and speak about this big question that I have, this big passion that I have, which is how do we live balanced, prosperous, purposeful lives where we get to feel as though we have a meaningful impact on the world, mm-hmm. not where we're either just taking care of number one and screwing the world, or where we're martyring ourselves to some cause and forgetting about ourselves, but what is a way of life in which we actually get to live joyfully and happily in service of each other, which I actually believe is the way we were born and are meant to live. And so No Impact Man opened up a career pathway for me where I actually get to bring that question before people and have conversations and stimulate people into thinking about that for themselves. And most importantly, to believe that it's actually possible, that I can have an authentic, impactful life where I meaningfully engage with the concerns and the problems that I see in the world, that I can and do make a difference. To be able to be part of that conversation, to me, is just amazing. It's an incredible privilege, and I feel really blessed to get to talk about this.
And this is kind of the subject matter of your newest book, How to Be Alive, and so between No Impact Man and that book, there's a stretch of years there where a lot happens in your life, personally, professionally, etc. And I think what you're describing is the process, the inner process you went through to uncovering this meaning, and this intersection of work and contribution, that has become the impact or the teaching, if you will, that you're looking to now really talk about. And do you find that people still want to talk to you about environmental things? Are you still out doing that, or you're really promoting now yourself as more of a, what would you call it? Like not life, is it life coaching or kind of career path direction?
Well, I like to think that I take a little bit more holistic approach than just thinking about career. I mean, one of the things that I think that it's, one of this, what I call standard. So How to Be Alive, just so our listeners can know that the subtitle is How to Be Alive, a guide to the kind of happiness that helps the world. So basically it's about how do I find a way of life that makes me feel secure and happy, but also helps the world. In other words, where it's not a zero-sum game, where I get something for myself across the world, or I give something to the world at the cost to myself, but actually I find a way of living that's both happy for me and happy for the world. One of the one of the things that I talk about in How to Be Alive is what I call standard life approaches. So the standard life approach is, you grow up, you go to college, even if you have to go in tremendous debt to do so, because then you're going to get a job in a corporation, and you're going to get a mortgage and a house and a partner and maybe some kids if you're so inclined, and then you're going to believe that you're doing good in the world because your taxes are paying for the social services and the police and all this kind of stuff, and that everything is, you don't have to worry about that because the politicians are taking care of that, and then sooner or later you all through that you'll have health benefits and retirement benefits, and you'll be able to educate your children, and eventually, when you're 65, you'll get to go on a bunch of cruises or something until you have your heart attack and die. Right. So that's the standard life approach, right?
Yeah.
And a big element in the standard life approach is that the big decision we have to make is what our job is going to be, right? That's the big thing. And we're told about this and talk about this endlessly, but we never ask ourselves, what's our community going to be like? How are we going to eat? What stuff do we really need to own? How much of our lives do we want to spend commuting? Where should we live in relation to our jobs? All these kind of things. They say that the science shows that the quality of our daily commute is as important to our happiness as whether or not we have a romantic partner. So it's huge, the quality of our commute. Meanwhile, the transportation sector is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, right? So we have these questions like how we think all we're supposed to be thinking about is what job are we going to take, right? And we'll leave everything else to the politicians and the civil servants and the urban designers and all of that. We'll just worry about our jobs. But the truth of the matter is that it's gotten to the stage where the food that we're getting is not good for us. All of these. So first of all, we can no longer trust everybody else to take care of every part of our life. But second of all, this question of ignoring all other areas of our lives, particularly community and friendships, means that we're not as happy as we can be. So my point here is that I think not just about what job we should have, but what life we should lead. And I think about that in particular because what I say is that our personal lives are made up of our relationships to the world. And we have many, many relationships to the world. We relate to the world through our jobs, yes, but we also relate to the world through our food. We relate to the world through what we buy, who we talk to, all of that. And then, so the question is, how do we actually find security and meaning in each one of those world relationships? In each one of the relations, like so how do I have security? How do I make even how I eat meaningful? Not just my job, And that's what I talk. And the great consolation of this approach is that it gives us freedom, because sometimes what's most meaningful and purposeful actually doesn't come to us, in particular to a person, doesn't come through their paid employment, right? But they can find other ways to find their meaning and purpose.
So separate the 100-night meditation practice, are there ways where you've found, through maybe your work with others or heard from other people, like are there strategies, let's call it, for kind of digging into this question more deeply? Maybe there are questions people ought to ask themselves, or maybe even contemplative techniques that help kind of probe in this way? Because I have found that is been like one of the premier questions of my life is what do I want to be doing with my time? What kind of impact do I want to make? Who do I want to be working with? What kind of contribution? What am I really interested in? That sort of stuff. And so there's all that questions. Then there's all the kind of messages we get from the outside. There's the inside, and then there's the outside. How does a person maybe explore this actively looking with an open mind?
Right. So I actually have an exercise I can tell you about. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So just so my website is at colinbeavan.com. It's COLINBEAVAN.com. And if you go to my website and you search how to find your calling, you'll find this exercise. But I'll also explain it. First of all, knowing what makes us happy. We're very bad predictors of what will make us happy in the future.
Right.
So deciding, I want that, and then rushing towards it without knowing, oftentimes we get to the place and it doesn't make us happy the way we thought it would. What we are good at is knowing when we've been happy in the past, and when we felt fulfilled in the past, and when we felt like we're making a contribution in the past. So this exercise has to do with looking backwards. Have you ever seen sometimes when you're in an airplane coming in and you look down and you see the boats and you see their wake. You can see the boats and you can see their wake behind them, right? The kind of line in the water.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Okay. And that's how you tell what direction they're going in. You tell where they're going in the future by where they've been in the past, right? Because you can't actually see the motion of the boats. So that's really interesting to me. I feel like that's also true of me as a person, that one of the ways to tell where I should be going in the future is to look at the trajectory I've taken in the past. And so this exercise has four parts. The first part is, I suggest, and if you really want to do it thoroughly, it will take 3 weeks to do this exercise. But the first part is, I suggest for a week, you take 20 minutes a day and you just write as fast as you can about what concerns you most in the world, what you'd fix in the world if you could, just things could. Just keep writing and writing and writing over the course of a week.
Stream of consciousness, just 20 minutes a day. Take it from your mind to the page. Got it.
That's exactly. Then when that's done, you can read through and bullet point it out. What are the big themes that are coming out in that writing? In other words, so you're not trying to decide, you're looking for the trend in yourself or the way themes emerge, as opposed to like trying to figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. So then you'll read through that and you bullet point it out. These are the things, and you'll have a list of the things that, the themes that have come up, the things that I care about in the world. So next you spend a week, 20 minutes a day, writing about the times in your life when you've been happiest. What were you doing? Who were you with? What skills or talents were you using in those moments? These are the times where you kind of disappear to yourself, right? And again, you're not trying to figure it out. You're just writing as fast as you can, stream of consciousness. And at the end of the week, you again look through and you bullet point it out and see what themes have come up. What are the times? Well, when I'm around family, or this type of thing. The third thing is, what are the conditions under what conditions have I felt the most safe and taken care of, right? Mm-hmm. It could be, and again, you write every day for 20 minutes, stream of consciousness, right? So what we're looking at here is, when the reason why we do where I've felt safe and taken care of, it's what are the conditions under which I'm able to act on my concerns and fulfill my passions, where I'm not scared for myself. So you might write that you can write down, it could be, when I was in the countryside, when there was a lot of money in my bank, when my dad did this. So you're kind of making clear to yourself what you need to feel safe. Sorry, I said that there were 4 things you had to do, but there's only 3. Mm-hmm. And again, when you come to the end of that, you bullet point it out. And so now what you have is you have a list of the things that you care about, the things that you have always cared about in the world. Not the things that you think you will care about, but the things you have always cared about in the world, the types of things that you want to make an impact on. The kind of skills and passions and interests that when you exercise them have made you happiest. And then the circumstances you need to be comfortable and safe. And with those 3 bullet pointed lists, it doesn't tell you what job you should get, but it doesn't tell you where you should live, but it moves towards giving you a list of qualifications for the type of job you should have, the type of life you should have, the type of place you should live, the type of people you should surround yourself with.
Mm-hmm. So this is a 3-week process.
Yes.
And by the end of this, you have a kind of a real map in place. And boy, I would imagine after that, if that many ideas likely percolate up for people who see that through.
Well, and the reason why you're taking a week over each one and letting yourself write stream of consciousness is because you're letting themes emerge from deep inside yourself, as opposed.
Writing is really good for that, isn't it? I've started writing recently, just journaling in the morning, and it's incredible. It's an incredible process. I have not ever been somebody who was a journaler. I never kept a diary, but recently I've really started doing that, and it's amazing what happens through that process of putting words on a page. Really powerful.
Well, we're not trained really to listen to ourselves, so writing is one way to listen to ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to shift gears a bit and just kind of talk a little bit about you and sort of how you do things. So you live in New York City. You live in Brooklyn, and you work from home usually, or do you go out to an office or some hybrid there? How do you do that day to day?
So for me, my work, any freelancer knows this, that a big part of having a freelance lifestyle is personal management. And so to me, there's this calculus between the work that I need to get done, whether or not I want to be alone, whether I need some stimulation or whether I need quiet. And so I tend to, depending on how I feel in a particular day and what I need to do, I'll either work at home, but oftentimes I work in coffee shops too. I don't go to an office. I don't because a lot of my work is on the computer or writing. I don't like co-working spaces where people are expected to be quiet, because I'm already isolated enough, or if I'm working at home, I'm on my own. I like places where I'm able to talk to other people, and then they can feel free to talk to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. And your mode of transport around New York is bike. Is that still the case? Are you mostly on your bike, or do you take the subway, or only so often?
I bike, I walk, and I take the subway. In the winters, I'm more often on. I do occasionally climb in a car. it's very rare. In the winter I tend to walk more. Sometimes I ride the subway, but those are my methods of transportation. And I want to say that it's not out of some I like that it's good for the environment. I think that I personally believe that cars are, they're a century and getting on to being a century and a half old technology. They suck. They take up 17% of the average American's income. They move very slowly. The average speed is something like 13 miles an hour because of traffic jams, and they wreck the planet that we live in, and they actually have a negative impact on our happiness and our health. So I don't like cars, but it's not that I don't get in it because of trying to save the world or something. It's because actually the research, my experience and the research shows that people who transport themselves actively, active transportation, which means basically walking, biking, rollerblading, scootering, those people, their commutes are happier than any other types of person's commute. Not that all of us can do that, unfortunately. So our built environment disallows many of us from transporting ourselves in that way. But research even shows that people who, if you have to take a train, people who are able to walk to the train station rather than drive their car to the train station are happier than the people who walk to the train station have a better reported satisfaction with their commute than the people that drive.
Well, it's funny. We live in Southern California now. People are always asking us about New York City, New York life, and the subways. I think for some reason people still think the subways in New York are like they were in the 70s. Really dirty and dangerous. And they're not the cleanest place in the city, but I always found probably 80% of the time riding the train to be very pleasant because it was quiet and I got a lot of reading done. And it was very peaceful, and I like not being in control kind of my, piloting this craft that I'm on. So there is a big upside to the subway. I think a lot of people feel that way, actually. It's one place where you can actually be quiet.
I really love the subway. Sometimes I decide, if I'm going into Manhattan, say, and I might ride my bike, if I feel, like I said, with my, working alone, if I feel a little lonely, I ride the subway to be amongst other people, and the people watching I love the subway. The people watching is great. And
I know that you and I have talked a number of times over the years about food and about how food gets to cities and about transport and quality of food. I'm interested. I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but do you have a certain diet you follow or certain themes that you follow in and around kind of how you buy food, where you buy food from, things like that?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, the question of food. Again, if we're looking at how to live our lives from the perspective of what makes us happy and healthy, and also what makes the world happy and healthy, right? So it turns out that that food, the agricultural industry in the world causes about 40% of the climate emissions. Mm-hmm. So it has a huge impact on our planet's ability to sustain us, not to mention the water pollution and all that kind of thing that happens from the agricultural chemicals and the effluent from different types of livestock and forest. Much of the Amazon rainforest has been mowed down in order to graze cattle on the land. So the production of our food has a massive environmental impact. But of course, what we eat also has a massive impact on our bodies and our health. And it turns out that the food that's best for the planet is also the food that's best for our bodies. Mm-hmm. So I choose to be a vegetarian because for many reasons. One, because the other thing about the meatpacking industry here in the United States is that it's one of the worst industries in terms of workers. So there's a social justice element, not to mention how the American meatpacking industry actually treats the animals,
right.
which is appalling. But it also so happens that it's better for my body. My doctor prefers that I'm a vegetarian, and also less expensive. So to me, it comes now. I don't believe that everybody has to make the same choices. There may be some people who don't want it. They don't want to be vegetarian, and they make better choices than me in some other area in our lives. Like, I don't believe that the choices that we make are standard. I think that we each have to find our own authentic path, our own authentic, compassionate path. But that's part of mine.
And what about dairy? Do you eat dairy and eggs? Is that part of your diet?
I have a small amount of dairy in moderation, in very small amounts of dairy, and I sometimes eat eggs, but they're not a staple in my diet.
Right. And I know we only have about 10 minutes left, so I want to definitely get to this sequence of questions. You talked a lot about your Zen practice and about your history there, which is a long history. When you get up in the mornings, do you have a specific routine or morning practice that you follow?
And so generally in my routine when I wake up in the morning is if my daughter Isabella lives with me half the time. So if she's here, then I get up and I sort her out and make her breakfast and make her lunch and walk her to school. And then I come home and I meditate for 40 minutes. And then I get to work. If she's not here, then I get up and I meditate for 40 minutes and then I feed myself and get to work. Except for, as it happens, I'm on another stretch of doing 100 days of practice. And for the first week into I'm been getting up and doing my practice from 4 in the morning till 7 in the morning. Again, because actually I'm in a kind of period in my life where I'm a little bit in transition and I'm not feeling clear and I want to get some insight. So just at the moment, my morning practice is to get up at 4 in the morning and practice until 7.
And is that a straight through meditation or are there breaks?
I do. So in my school, we have a number of practice forms. We have bows, which are basically you start standing and you come down to the floor. You could call them Zen squat thrusts if you want.
Right.
So I do 108 bows. Then I do some chanting. That takes between the bows and the chanting. That takes the first hour. And then I sit for 55 minutes. I will then do walking meditation for 10 minutes, and then I sit for another 55 minutes.
And the walking, do you leave the apartment and go outside, or do you stay
outside?
No,
just kind of pace back and forth between my living room and my kitchen.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you before about your fitness practice, but between riding a bike and doing those bows, I imagine that's enough.
Well, I also run. I'm actually I'm a member of the Board of Transportation Alternatives here in New York, and
Right.
That's the nonprofit that advocates for bikers and walkers here in the city. So I'm going to run in the New York Half Marathon in March, and it's a sponsored. No doubt, I'll be hitting you up. Actually, it's a sponsored. it's a sponsored thing. So I run too.
Got it. That's very active. That's very active.
For an American.
For an American, that's right. And so you have this.
The average. I'm so full of these. The average American only uses their body 19 minutes a day, which is another reason. Yeah, 19 minutes a day, which is another reason for walking and biking.
Yeah, I think that has spawned this trend of treadmill desks and things like that, which have really caught fire here in the last few years. So when you do your morning practice, so let's take a case study of a day you do it and a day you don't do it. What's the difference? Like, what happens just in terms of your feeling through the day, how your day goes, absent the practice and with the practice, what kind of subtle or not so subtle differences have you noticed?
Right. So I mean, first of all, to say, I think practice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like Zen meditation practice, but some sort of contemplative practice. I mean, it could be a prayer practice, and it could be a meditation practice, but a practice where you're in a mode of spiritual inquiry. Mm-hmm. What I want to say is that it doesn't just have an effect in a day, but it has a cumulative effect, right?
Yes.
So it's easier for me to tell the difference between when I'm halfway through a period of intense practice versus when I'm just doing my normal practice. When I'm in a period of intense practice, as I am now, I get more energy. I feel clearer. I worry less. I have less anxiety. But another reason for doing that is not just about actually feeling better, but to begin to search for and have some understanding of what we are and what we are in relation to the world. So in Buddhism, the first noble truth is that life has suffering in it. But another interpretation is that life has dysfunction. And one way of interpreting that the dysfunction comes from us having an incorrect view of what we are. Mm-hmm. That we think of ourselves as separate beings who have to extract from the world the things that we need and are happy, and therefore have to chase after our desires. When you have a contemplative spiritual experience and practice and are in a mode of spiritual inquiry, you get to question whether that's actually true, that we are 100% separate from each other, and actually look at what's our true nature. And so the practice is not just about feeling better in the day, but coming to have a certain intuitive understanding of your place in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest comfort.
Yeah. That's nice. And plus it helps the practitioner to not become sort of results oriented, which can be can undermine the real value, which is what I think you're talking about.
Right.
So a few quick questions that we like to ask everybody who's on the podcast, some sort of quick answer questions to wrap up with.
And after we do the questions, or there's something that I'd love to tell your listeners about. If that's okay.
Yeah. That sounds good. So
you want me to do it now or after the questions? Okay.
After the questions, okay, cool. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So what book or books, a maximum of 3, not your own, do you want your daughter to read? Or if maybe she's already read them, and if not that case, what 3 books should every young person read to help prepare them for this world we live in now? And you can't say No Impact Man or How to Be Alive. What would those 3 be?
Gosh. I mean, one book that comes to mind is translation of a teaching written by the second patriarch of Zen Buddhism. It's called Trust in Mind. In the first lines, it starts, "The great way is not difficult. Just put down your thoughts and opinions." And it goes on like that, and it's very accessible. And it basically, what it says is, what it basically tells us is that if we want to operate in sync with the world, then we need to stop pushing things about the world away from us that we dislike and pulling towards us the things that we like, but actually learn to operate with what is. So Trust in Mind is a book. There's a book that I really like, and it's called it's called Stories. It's a wonky title, but it's called Stories Jesus Still Tells, and it's actually a book of essays about the parables of Jesus in the New Testament. Now, I'm not religious. I have no objection to religious people. But I'm not particularly religious. But I do like to take wisdom from the great religious traditions, and I love this book. It basically, so for example, it retells the story of the prodigal son. It retells the story of the Good Samaritan, and I think, and I really like that book. Let's see.
And that's called Stories Jesus Still Tells.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm actually by my bookshelf now trying to see it, but if you ask me tomorrow what books I think kids should read, I'll come up with a whole different list.
Sure.
But still, these are.
This is really good. These are really good. Very out of the box. I like it. Different. I've not heard of either of those. Yeah.
Okay, cool. The Trust in Mind, by the way, you can totally find on the internet, and it's only maybe a 20-minute or half an hour read. And then a book that's helped me a lot, this is going to sound cheesy, is Jack Canfield's The Success Principles.
Oh, that's a great book.
Yeah, I've just found it. I found it over time very helpful. And one thing that's interesting to me about books like that is people tend to think of them in the circles that I mix in, activists, spiritual circles. Books like that are a little bit looked down upon because there's a feeling that their job, that the point of them is all about getting rich. But actually, I've found the tools in those books, in that book in particular, to be really good for all areas of my life, not just how much I earn.
This conversation with you is your official outing as a full-blown woo-woo, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's true.
Second question, what's the best meal you've ever had?
God, the best meal I've ever had. I'll tell you this, I like good food, but what I like is to be surrounded people that I love and where we laugh. And I can't think of a meal in particular at the moment where that's happened, but I love to sit with people that I love or people that I like and have good conversation. Probably my favorite restaurant is Kitty Corner across the street from me. It's called the Conda, Vinny, and Ollie. And I expect I get a free dessert next time I go in for saying that. But I like it. The food is good. But what I really care about is the atmosphere. The owners, there's 3 owners, and every time I go in, they come up because they know I'm a neighbor. They come up and they shake my hands and they ask how Bella is, and then one time they happened to find out it was Bella's birthday, and they made a big fuss of her in the whole restaurant. It's the friendliness of it that what I care most about. I guess it's the companionship that can come in a meal.
And community. Yeah,
that's right.
What thing, item, or keepsake have you owned for the longest period of time?
Oh. I have when I was a kid, my grandfather he used to go to Florida for the summers, and one time when he came back to our little town in Westport, Massachusetts, he gave me a little jackknife, and he said that he had been walking down the street and he found it in the sand, and he picked up and he saved it for me. And there's something about that that meant a lot to me, because somehow it feels more thoughtful than if somebody buys something. Like, it meant that I was in his consciousness, and it wasn't my birthday and he bought me something, but he was walking down the street and he saw a jackknife and he thought, oh, Colin would like that. I still have that. And I guess another thing that's really important to me, I have my grandfather was a bigwig government worker. He was actually a bigwig in the CIA. And before that, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services. And when he retired from the Office of Strategic Services, he was given a Swiss watch made by Vacheron and Constantin. It's a wind-up watch, and I have that, and I wear that. I've had it not rehabilitated, refurbished, and I wear that watch whenever I'm doing something that makes me nervous, or a new challenge, like, if I'm going to go give a talk in some particularly important place or meet somebody that intimidates me. I wear that watch because I feel as though it takes my grandfather and my family history along with me.
That's nice. So it's a source of comfort and connection to something bigger than you, and probably somebody. My grandfather always had this presence about him, where you felt like I could just be in his care and he would take care of everything, which was always really, really nice.
My grandfather had a sense of authority about him, and I think
I could imagine, yeah, CIA. I would bet there's a little weight, gravitas walking around with that.
Yeah.
This ought to be interesting. If you could do anything else to make money, what would that be?
Well, to make money, this wouldn't make a lot of money, but I actually put, I told you I'm in a period of transition and kind of deciding exactly what I want to do moving forward. And I made a note today that I'd really like to be a barista for a while. And I don't think it makes much money. There's lots of other things that I'd like to do too. I'd like to, I'd like to captain a sailing ship or whatever. But today, if you ask me any of these questions tomorrow, I'll give you entirely different answers.
That's great.
But in this moment, what comes to mind is barista, and the reason is because one of the things I don't like about writing is that it's always working towards something, right? Like you're building some project that's going to happen in the future or something. Whereas being a barista, your job is completed each moment by moment, right? And I like that. But also because I'm really quite intensely social, and I like having short conversations with people more than long conversations.
Right, which is perfect for that job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, last question. What have you learned in the last 30 days that you think everyone should know?
What have I...
When I say 30 days, that's loose. Within the...
It could be 31 days or 29 days.
The 31st day is in play.
Maybe this isn't a good lead into what I... Does it have to be something I've learned, or can it be something that I've relearned and be reminded?
That sounds good. No, that sounds good.
So, one of the things that I've relearned is the importance of having a group of people around you who support your values as you move forward in your life and want to make the kind of changes that you want to make. I actually read a quote by Napoleon Hill. He said, when any of us decide to move out of our mediocrity, there are many people around us, including often our families, who want to criticize us and stop us from moving out of our mediocrity. And so it's really important to actually have a safe place to share your aspirations and explore your aspirations in a group of people. I think I'm talking really about a mastermind group, and to bring together a group of people who share your values. And I actually just posted on my blog today about how to start and run a mastermind group. That's a group of people who each person is fully committed to the successful manifestation of each person's vision in the group. And so having a group of people that support your values, I think I've been reminded of that. And what I had wanted to, which leads me into what I had wanted to tell our listeners, which is that I've actually launched a program of mastermind groups which people can join. And these groups are particularly that they're facilitated by me, and they're particularly for people who who are really concerned with having some sort of positive impact on the world, and are looking to find their true vocation and to strategize and be held accountable by a group of caring, supportive people as they move forward into that vision. And if people want to know more about that, they can go to my webpage. It's colinbeavan.com/mastermind. And this is a new program that I'm just launching that I'm really excited about.
And we'll be sure to link to that and your website and that exercise you gave earlier, your calling exercise. We'll be sure to put links to that in the show notes. That's really great. I want to echo the mastermind impact. I mean, that has changed my business life. It has saved me so much time. There's no downside, literally no downside to a mastermind, and I've been in one for about a year, and it's been huge in my development as an entrepreneur, businessman. We also talk about personal stuff on there too. We're like really good friends by now, but we're not the kind of friends who will endorse each other's bullshit either. It's really, really powerful, and I can imagine the masterminds you'll be leading would be really, really great for people. That's really exciting.
Yeah, thanks. I'm very excited by the people that are coming together to form these groups.
That's a cool idea. Well, listen, thank you, Colin. This has been really, really great. I appreciate your willingness to hop on the phone with us. Teresa is taking care of the baby, so anyway, she'll be really, really keen to hear all the stuff you've shared, and thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for doing this podcast.
All right, that's it for this week's Ownstream Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this awesome conversation with Colin Beavan, and be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything we talked about, including his website, social media handles, and all that stuff, plus a link to that calling exercise, a link to his new mastermind program that he talked about, of course, his books, and we will link to No Impact Man, the film. If you haven't seen that, you should absolutely see that. It's a really fascinating, fun, and well done film. I think you'll really get a lot out of it if you haven't seen it. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Colin Beavan. That's ownstream.co/Colin Beavan, COLIN, B as in boy, EAVAN. Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, an individual, a tip, or a tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that, again, at ownstream.co, and just click sign up. Finally, follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we do post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream Podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.